This is called the Audubon Marathon. On May 18th, the phone tree, Michelius of the math department, called to say the final 15-mile training run, they could have said last chance training run, for the marathon would be over the old Sumac Road. We were to meet at the Renaissance Fair, northeast corner by the Tiffany Glass, at noon. My aunt, who had been looking after my asthmatic lungs ever since the first tulip had opened, got the news that Mount St. Helens had blown at 8 a.m. "You're not going anywhere," she said. "There will be no marathon, not after the cloud hits. It's coming due east." "You're talking about something 300 miles away," I said. "What's a few flecks of rock in the air?" I was sitting on the floor, bending through the first of my stretches. "They say that cloud will be here by 2, she said. "What?" "You'll be out on the road and that cloud will kill you dead." "But I haven't had any real trouble since I started running," I told her. And to stir the waters up, I added, "Yeah, and this marathon will be the celebration of the end of illness." "If your parents could hear you now, when they work so hard to take care of you," she said, "their own sickly child." "Sickly my foot," I said, and went for the door, so to speak. "If you get pneumo, mono, volcano, silicanosis," she yelled, "don't come running to me." By the way, that's supposed to be one of the longest words in the English language. I am a classics professor with a briefcase, soon to be a shopping bag. And at that time, I lived with my aunt, who ought to have been one of two things: a pharmacist to various rare elements, hers and mine, or a writer of the book, A Complete Catalogue of the Unsettling. Her Celtic melancholy had taken a new form, you might call it flair, after my uncle's death in 1950. After she had locked up her famous ballroom, the Audubon, which had been the toast of the county, she had begun acquiring strange facts which were to keep her frightened and housebound for the rest of her life. Nevertheless, I was included in a group of 7 who were training for the upcoming marathon here in Mountain Ash County. Many others outside our town were getting ready as well, but they considered us, predicted finish times 3 hours 30 minutes, to be far too slow for their interests. Our 7 met at the splendid Tiffany Glass booth. Every year the county holds the Renaissance Fair. And although the sun was bright enough to light up one particularly beautiful red lamp, sun, moon, and stars on the shade, we were scarcely in talkative spirits. We only smiled and then headed out in a due west direction to reach this old Sumac Road. Within the first 5 miles we passed that definite but unseen line where it becomes okay to get competitive. And with the exception of Michelius and myself, the whole group started spreading itself out, one isolated person after another, along the roller coaster hills. It was then that I began noticing, once we had left town behind, that the sky had become increasingly strange. We came to the top of the long incline, and about 2 miles in the distance, the familiar scene of islanded pea field, farmhouse, and red barn suddenly looked two-dimensional, as if painted on a blue-violet backdrop in incandescent colors. The air was heavy, and I felt sure there would be lightning. We went past 2 women on horseback, and with the upcoming wind, the animals, bound for home, shied with fear. Beside the ranch, which we reached ahead of them, the sole mercury vapor lamp had come on, and the willows beside the creek reflected the most unearthly light, as in sustained eclipse. I looked directly overhead and could see that we were enclosed in 2 celestial domes, one the usual one, complete with cliché fleecy clouds, the other one larger than the first, a dome of night with a second zenith. "I think we better turn back," I said at last. "It's just rain," Michelius answered, and indeed for a moment the sky to the west did open up as if to give rain, but all that emerged was a great crack of red light, a broken holocaust. Ahead of us, what people we could see were caught in the strange slanted glow that only comes in a downpour when the sun goes shining oddly on just the same, sometimes with attendant rainbows. Finally, we were stopped by a farmer's truck. "You better get your ass off this road." Michelius was used to this. Having become my alter ego in running, he had taken to being so in other situations. "Now," he said, "this road is public, and the sheriff says—" "I'm not talking about that," the driver said. Haven't you heard about Mount St. Helens? There's an ash cloud coming this way due to hit any minute, and everybody's been ordered inside. Get going. I'll tell your friends up ahead. He pulled away in an indignant cloud of his own, and Achilles and I didn't dally. We turned tail, never running faster in our lives. At these moments, you always consider doing the proper cool-headed thing, stopping at a farmhouse and calling for help. But we were afraid the vile dust would arrive before we even got to the phone, so we ran like hell. We put up a good fight. The cloud caught up with us just 2 miles before we reached town. In this strange snowstorm, we decided to walk so as to avoid inhaling too deeply. However, once I reached my aunt's house, I collapsed on her doorstep and woke up in bed with a family doctor beside me. Then there's a little break here. I awoke to a window view of the garden dusted with mauve. A day had passed, the eclipse was over, but now instead of being on a second planet, we seemed to be on the heated side of the moon. Lots of bed rest, the doctor said, as he looked at my nodding aunt, and you'll have to find somebody else to help with the cleanup of your yard. You don't understand, I said, propped up by 3 bed pillows, but still wheezing. I'm a marathoner. Not anymore, my aunt said. Half the state's covered with ash, and the marathon has been canceled. She could have just as well said that the USSR had bombed California, and then what the doctor was about to say next is what I assume to be the nightmare of every runner. No more running. Nobody's allowed out anyway, except on emergencies or to clean up. But you especially, no running for the rest of the summer. What has come down now is only the beginning. The worst particles are due in a few weeks. I lay there, feeling my muscles going slack. My aunt and the doctor left the room. In my prison, I was allowed 1, a telephone, 2, a radio, 3, a laundered running uniform of no use to me now, 4, a view of the garden, 5, a sick tray with a glass of water and a bottle of asthma pills. This is impossible. And I saw that, to my horror, my aunt, draped against the dust, was outside with the male neighbors, hosing down rose bushes, grass, and tulips, doing her part for the county, while leaving me to rot inside. I lay there between dream and memory, lightheaded perhaps with fever, and was taken back to my childhood days when this was the standard fare. The moment the lilacs bloomed on the other side of the garage, I was ordered to bed, where I could always hear enticingly the other children playing outside. I'm not so sure how long I lay there, pinned down by depression, for those days were not demarcated by sunrise and sunset, but by dust storms. After hours. This was after hours, all right, because there were none, really. In the morning, the grass, conscientiously watered the night before, would look like any dawn-struck grass. Then the wind would start to rise, and by 3 p.m. we would have a premature, suicidally gray night. However, I must have gotten up by the 3rd day, when my aunt was outside, still watering down the ash at the prescribed hour of the morning. Not being able to endure anymore, I twirled the knob on the radio, which had given perennially disastrous news about Longview, Washington, and the boiling cauldron of Spirit Lake, and I thumbed down to the renegade station at the end of the scale, one I had hit only once before, and let the nonstop disco fill the room and make the walls vibrate in answer. Suddenly, I put on my running shorts and jogged in place, taking time every now and then to think about giving it again with an extra kick, such as I remember John Travolta doing. The phone rang. It was McKillius. What's that playing, he asked. Well, never mind, I said, turning it down. Just something that I saw in Saturday Night Fever. You, he began. Then he checked himself. How do you feel? Better, I said, and I assumed none of the rest of the group was hurt by the dust. No, nobody but you. Well, I'm better, I repeated, and I want to go running. You do, he said. You? I've been on the phone for 2 days now, and you should have heard what happened when they closed the streets and canceled the marathon. What? We all went berserk, all of us. Darrell, you know, the one in the locker room who works on weights? He threw a bench against the wall. Nancy, who's supposed to be analyzing this dust in her lab, ended up by throwing beakers in the sink. Sutton drove his car straight through the Safeway cart tray. He wasn't supposed to be out, I said. Nobody's allowed out. Well, there will be a lot out soon, Michaelius said. Already people are sneaking runs at night when the police aren't looking, even though you're supposed to be changing your oil and your air filters every 15 minutes. But what we're really looking for is an indoor place to run. We have all this training inside of us that needs to be let out. I looked out the window, saw my aunt watering down my garden, and I felt like a conspirator. You're right, I said as quickly as I could, despite my light wheezing. We don't know how long this will last, so we need to find a place where the runners can secretly meet and run. Michaelius paused a moment. I have a confession to make, he said. Yes. I tried stealing the wife's key to the YMCA where she's secretary. Excellent idea, I said, my color up. Did you get it? She caught me. Boy, did I get bawled out. Nobody's allowed out, she said. Why don't you try stealing it again? Can't. She's hidden it somewhere. And all the other runners have been trying things like it, and their husbands and wives are all acting like my aunt, I said ruefully. Listen, Michaelius, I've got an idea. Get the phones ringing on the phone tree and anybody else who runs in the county, and have them ready to converge on the old Audubon ballroom at a moment's notice. The what? I don't have time to explain, for I had heard my aunt coming back in. Just tell them to get ready for my call. First, I've got to get the key. The place is still burglar alarmed. What about your asthma? He asked. I don't care about that. I'll be ready for intensive care if I don't run by tonight. It's been 3 days, hasn't it, already? Yes, absolutely. And we'll be there at the drop of a hat. And he hung up. Half a second before my aunt had reached my room, I had gotten back into bed, hiding my shorts and my shoes. It's nice to see you looking better, she said, for she was in a wonderful mood. My total immobility had transformed her. She was now right out there in the land of dust and potential chills, invulnerable because of her purpose, fighting a battle in behalf of her nephew, a newly diagnosed case. Aunt Etta, I said in a tone prisoners must use when they are about to pull a fast one, you know, Uncle Cliff always used to say that the Audubon Marathon was the only thing that kept the county alive. Yes, without question, and she launched into one of her stories about him, in particular his vitality. I had predicted this story. When she was done, I said, and don't you think that if he were alive today, he'd still want people out on his dance floor? She looked at me suspiciously. No. Why? Well, I was thinking there might be a time, especially after we get some of this ash cleaned up, when people might want to congregate there for community support. I could hardly imagine why, she said. It might lift people's spirits to think on Uncle Cliff again. We might even want to start up with the dances once more. His memory is just reserved for me, my aunt said. Thanks. And not for me, I asked. Don't you think I'd like to saunter through just for our old time's sake? Well, for you too, of course, she said. Then why did you hide the key? I asked. I didn't hide it, she answered. And now we were at just exactly the turn in the conversation. Because after either here, she'd have to admit she'd embalmed poor Uncle Cliff's memory for herself and herself alone, or she'd have to let me know where the key was. The key. Why, it's mounted on a piece of embroidery, mounted in a frame, lying in the bottom drawer of the attic bureau, where it will stay until you're well enough to contemplate your uncle's memory. And, acting like a mother who's just finished with an irritable bedtime story, she turned on her heel and slammed the bedroom door. Lying there, however, I felt supported in my conspiracy by the music in my head, the ghost of the disco, and the ghost of my dead uncle. He had imported all those beautiful pictures and statues of birds just to give his 1920s ballroom more flair. I knew the memories by heart, too, and the stories. He had brought in a half-naked Venus, plump as Lillian Russell, cast in bronze in the Edwardian age, and placed her in a fountain just beneath the rotating reflector. He had put a neon bird atop his huge building, a red one, whose wings, cartoon-like, simulated taking off. I lay there for 7 or 8 hours while the day turned gray once more through the blind slats, and my aunt's radio announced in the living room that we were still in a state of emergency and probably would remain so until the first rain, which was not predicted for another 7 days. At 9 o'clock, I started counting my aunt's routine out, hearing her ready for bed. At 9:30, the sound of the bed springs. At 9:45, she plummeted like a rock into sleep, the first sound of heavy breathing. I got up stealthily and climbed the attic stairs. The overhead light showed me the bureau, the drawer, the embroidery, the work, and the key behind the glass. And also, to one side, the photo of my uncle in Fred Astaire pose. I smashed the glass quietly with a paperweight, using it on a cushioning antimacassar. The key was mine. I went down to the phone and called Achilles. We're on. Everybody meet down at the Audubon Marathon Ballroom at exactly 11. Suited up, I made my way along the lithic streets, which smiled and smelled, I thought, a violent odor of lilac the whole way. Was it spring or the dust? Or maybe the memory of being cooped up in bed with the lilacs starting to bloom? Whatever the memory, my lungs never felt clearer, and I felt for the first time that the dust, instead of being the angel of death, had actually created a whole, sustained, after-hours life of sinless pleasures snatched on the sly. By the time I reached the ballroom, and I didn't have far to walk, runners were already there, banging at the doors. We're going to have a marathon, they yelled. Wait a minute, I said to Achilles, who had also arrived. I wasn't planning on this tonight, just a trial run to see how it works. I had to say something to keep them from rioting, he answered. When I produced the key, a general cheer went up. I unlocked the double doors, flicked switches, and the taboo energy running through the ancient wires lit up the crystal dance hall, dusty, yes, but free of the least touch of mauve ash, which we shut out. The reflector began to creak and turn. The gems spun on the wall as if we were at the bottom of a lake, or indeed at the bottom of a deeper sea in the sunken Titanic ballroom itself. Well, let's get things set up, hysterical and self-appointed organizers said. They had stopwatches, lap counters, impromptu t-shirts, lists. More runners were hurrying in, and I'm sure that night we had 100% turnout, all transferred from the original marathon plan. An eighth of a mile pathway had been cleared, whose hub was the overplump Venus, and already the runners were beginning to warm up. I simply stood there, aware that the police could arrive at any minute, but eventually they did. Watched the ball turn and finally broke into a full run myself, my head clearing, my back loosening, and my legs becoming easy and supple again. It was like being out on the old sumac road once more before the angel of death had arrived. For example, on one fully sunlit afternoon with high sailing clouds, wind, and nothing but shorts, I climbed to the top of the worst hill in my best time and had seen, in the perspective below, shadows open briefly on the green hills like an umbrella, like a pair of enormous wings. And so the Audubon Marathon, now legendary in this county, began. 8 times 26.2 miles is approximately 210 laps, and we made it 215 just for good measure. Unfortunately, the police raided us before everyone, myself included, could finish. However, just as they were coming in, as I heard them above the disco music of the ghetto blaster, which someone had put on the top of the jukebox, I ran over to the switch that my uncle had pointed out to me long ago and, wheezing but still hoping to go another lap, pushed into full-scale blazing light the red neon eagle who, through the glass dome, was seen for miles taking flight from our roof. Was seen for miles and talked of long after the county had washed itself clean and our criminal action generally forgiven, even after my aunts started speaking to me again, and I had replaced the glass of the frame which had held the key. That remembered eagle nowadays helps me keep away from the old man with the shopping bag years, and signals the time I decided at last, 1 year later, to move out of my aunt's house and into one of my own, complete with eagle on the mailbox and disco on my radio still. Thank you.